moving more in one direction. But before we really deep dive into that, you know, I've watched your stream quite a few times. This is your first time on the show, and there's one thing that we didn't address. And as I see chat asking me to unbutton my shirt, how long have you been a man who is identified by feral locks of manly chest hair?
Well, you know, I originally started the unbuttoning thing because it was laundry day, and I was doing t-shirts, and I ran out of t-shirts, and I was like, I don't really feel like doing laundry today. I guess I'll break into the closet and see what we got that's still clean that I can wear. And so I ended up wearing a buttoned-up shirt that day, and then just kind of on a lark decided that maybe we'd unbutton as the stream went along. Something for the ladies, you know. And so it got a response. It got a positive response, and then the next day I decided to wear another button up, see what, you know. There you go, Rich. Get comfortable. Get comfortable. And
I like it.
And so now it's just become kind of a thing. And at one point I was like, you know, maybe, you know, occasionally I'd upload a video to YouTube, and I'd get someone on YouTube saying, button up your shirt, you look disgusting. And I was like, okay, maybe I've gone too far in the other direction. Maybe I'll try to button up my shirt a little bit more to keep it classy. But every time I try to do that, I get yelled at in stream. Like, I get people that immediately, as soon as they see my hand going for a button, you know, finish one up, they start screaming, and that wasn't a good look either. So I felt like I've come to a compromise now. I have had some streams where the shirt ended up fully unbuttoned. That felt maybe a little
on
too
Twitch?
much on Twitch.
Oh.
And
So,
you know, it's
what you get what Sloot said to me is you could actually stream as a guy without the shirt as long as you don't take the shirt off midstream. So if you
That makes
start
sense.
with no shirt, yeah, if you start with no shirt, you're good. I don't know, man. I tried to just unbutton right now. I'm unbuttoning and my shirt won't even move apart. I don't know how to do it.
It's a skill. You have to. This doesn't just fall this way. This isn't the natural way of the shirt. You have to. It looks, you know, like nonchalant, right? Like this is the way the shirt goes, but it's shirt by shirt, like different. If you've got starch, it's gonna fight you a little bit more. You probably gotta spend a little more time massaging it. Some shirts have a nice natural sort of flow to them that they just. Some shirts are way out, like you actually have to rein those bad boys in, and that's just it's a shirt by shirt basis. You get familiar with your wardrobe, and
So you have a lot of experience. I only really wear t-shirts and v-necks, so I really don't even know. Like, I guess the closest that I come is just wearing a hoodie and not a shirt underneath.
yeah, well,
So
you're missing out.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I already look like a skeleton. Like, you know, people can see enough of my bones already. If I'm going there not wearing a t-shirt, it'd be scary, okay? People would leave the stream. They'd be upset. I can see you've got a lot of experience.
I think you should try it one time. I think you'd be surprised. I think you'd be surprised at the reaction you get from your stream.
I think that I would be surprised. You're right about that.
Talking about like shirts for so long has made me think about last week's MDI competition that featured the Chinese team. Yeah. Were you able to watch the MDI, trying to analyze, trying to get a sneak peek of a future competition? And what were your thoughts about it?
I got to watch some of it. Unfortunately, the realities of international competition are such that I think that tournament wrapped up at some time around like 8 or 9 a.m. So yeah. I stayed up till, I think, 4 a.m., giving my best go. It was around the time that there was the reset on the BRH dungeon, and that was kind of my we're going to bed moment.
Doing that was pretty weird, the tournament like that. And I believe APAC's going to be the same way as well. My computer randomly broke, so I actually can't even use Twitter right now. I was asking the guys to see what time they actually started, but for us casting, yeah, I think we got there at 9 p.m. Show starts at 11, and then we were there till like 10 in the morning, like every day. It's pretty weird, but it's important to do that for China. It was something like 200,000 people or something were watching in China, which is pretty cool. They get to cheer on their own region. Yeah, so it's worth it, you know. you get to do for like that region, it's going to be kind of geared to their home times every time. But do you feel like now as a MDI competitor, you got to go back and actually watch VOD and figure out what these teams were doing, or is the main focus right now just going to be on your own region because that's the first bracket you got to go through?
It kind of depends. I don't think you feel compelled to watch every match. There might be, certainly the top teams. Like you're probably gonna want to go back and watch Skyline D, see what they did in every map that they're doing, and for any team that you think you might potentially run into later on in the tournament, you want to see if they're struggling in any dungeon or if they look really strong in any dungeon, because you're not gonna want to pick that against them. As far as watching to like lift strats from people, you might there are some dungeons that are pretty straightforward. There's nothing like innovative that's going to happen from pole to pole. There might be one or two spots in the dungeon where you're like, all right, I know there's an opportunity for something crazy here. I'm going to go see how this team did that, see if they did anything innovative or not. But I don't. And the other thing is, because of the social nature of Twitch, if somebody did something really wild in a match that you wanted to see, you probably heard about it the next day. You know, if somebody said like, "Oh wow, did you see, you know, that crazy pull they did in BRH?" You're gonna go, "Oh, let me go fire up the VOD and check out BRH, see, you know, what happened in there." But for the most part, I think if people are going back and watching it, it's probably just for enjoyment. You might study a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fair. I mean, also, like you said, what was one of the craziest things that happened? It was, of course, what we saw with the mages, right? But everybody kind of, I feel like a lot of people already knew that was going to happen the second we saw the mages on the dungeon, and you just watch the clip, and then you can try the strategies yourself. And one of the big things that I kind of talk about is I've watched your streams quite a bit. You know, we were actually all the casters the night before the show trying to see what you guys were up to. How do you guys actually get to practice? Obviously, the tournament realm is a lot different than anything you've seen before. Does that make you actually practice the dungeon in a different way? Like, are you only doing part of the dungeon at a time, then like going back and just running the beginning over and over again? Or how much does it change from live servers?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more repetition on the tournament realm. That's one thing that, you know, they made the change earlier in the expansion. It used to be that when you ran out of time on a keystone on live, that the key would deplete, and it would still be the same. So if you were doing like a level 15 key and you missed the timer on it, the key didn't change. It just became a depleted level 15 whatever, and you could run that over and over and over and over and over again on that 15 until you got all the pulls down that you wanted to get done. And that was like Meow Chan in the last tournament. His team became notable for doing those high keys, and they would just practice repeatedly the pulls on those high keys until they got them right, and then they'd go do the depleted key and time it, and you could get used to that. But now on live, if you deplete a key, it drops a level. So if you don't get it right the first time, you don't get an opportunity to go back in and practice it. You just tough luck. Now if you were doing a 25, now it's 24. And it's close to a 25, but it's not a 25, and so you don't get that opportunity to practice. Whereas on the tournament realm, you go in and keep doing the same dungeon over and over again until you get it right, and it makes it a lot easier to iron out the strats. On like a lot of times, you will not do the wildest stuff on live that you probably could do because you don't get an opportunity to practice it. Like the first time you see a 28 key, the first time that we had an opportunity to try a 28 vault, we probably could have pulled bigger than we pulled, but we never had an opportunity to practice on 28, and if you screw it up, that's it. That was the key. So on the tournament realm, you have the freedom to say like, oh, I think we can do this big pull on this key, and if it doesn't go right, we can still keep trying it over and over until we perfect it. Because a lot of times those big pulls, there's just like little thing, you know, the tank when he's gathering up the mobs, he has to use abilities in a certain order, and if he screws up the order of it at all, then the mob gets cast off and you wipe. And on a live key, that would just be the end of the dungeon. But well, next time we try this, I need to flip-flop the order of those abilities, and let's do it again. Okay, let's do it again. And you get to the point where some of these big pulls that you'd never try on live, you can start really consistently doing on the tournament realm, to where you would feel safe pulling it out in the tournament setting, not feeling like you're rolling dice. So, yeah, it definitely changes the way that you practice.
Yeah.
Is that something that you'd like to see happen on live servers? Like for them to add a way for you to test the keys before? I don't really know how that would work, and I think it'd be like really niche. but it is kind of an issue for people that are trying to compete.
Yeah, it's when they initially made the change away from the depletion system into just de-leveling the key, I was in favor of it because, frankly, I don't want to go practice a key over and over and over. I like the high stakes live setting where you get one shot. If you blow it, that's it.
8 Mile.
Yeah. So if you added back the practice system, you would probably see like more entertaining stuff for viewers, because you'd be able to go in and practice those keys over and over again. But I don't think you'd have the same level of suspense for those high keys that if you have that one opportunity, and then that's it, and it adds the level of pressure that I really enjoy on live that you don't have on the tournament.
Well, I think the thing that was pretty good was they almost had this idea of it was relatively easy if you would try and qualify to get on the tournament realm, and then you could get that practice in, you could go about the time trials. And I think that just needs to consistently be the thing. Like, I feel like these feel fine online, but I thought it was really interesting. We were watching you in Halls of Valor, and you basically were trying to figure out the first crash pull, and we could kind of see that with you were saying, just going through these massive pulls, and then you just run back in and try it again. And it is cool to actually see teams do just that. But I want to talk about some of the changes that you guys actually went through with time trials and things like that. How did you think the time trials worked for the MDI?
Well, and just for anyone that's not familiar with how the time trials are set up on the tournament realm, the MDI this time, and first off, time trials did not exist in the last MDI. There was just a qualification on live, and then the top 8 teams from live moved into the regional round. And this time, Blizzard set up a system where there was a qualification thing on live that gave you access to the tournament realm. And then, so there were a bunch of teams that had access to the tournament realm. And then every team that qualified for the tournament realm had the opportunity to participate in time trials. And then each of the top 8 teams per region from time trials moved into the regional stage. And the time trials phase was a series of 3 dungeons. One that was 20 Maw, one that was a 22 Upper, and one that was a 24 Nels. And each team had the opportunity to run those dungeons as many times as they wanted over the course of the week. And your goal was just to post the fastest time in each of those dungeons that you could. And the cumulative time across all 3 keys would add all the keys up, and whichever 8 teams had the 3 fastest, or had the fastest time across all 3 keys, would advance to region. And that was different from last MDI, and I enjoyed time trials as a concept. I liked having a week to just go in and run these dungeons over and over to see what the fastest times you could get. What I did not enjoy, and what became kind of a meme coming out of the time trials, was the proliferation of 4 DPS comps. Because
that was dumb.
Yes, I concur.
Okay, good. Yeah. So do you think that, next time whenever they do this, do you think they should just lock it to having 3 DPS, 1 tank, 1 healer?
Well, that's a way they could do it. I don't know that I like that system as much, because I feel like that addresses like a symptom but not the actual problem. And I think the problem from time trials was that, and I guess to sort of explain it, Blizzard for the MDI has made it, I think, a priority to keep the level of keys that you're doing in the MDI lower than what you see on live servers. And they've not come out and explained the reasoning on it, but I think it's pretty clear that the reason for that is that the live tournament setting. Yeah, exactly.
That was not exactly fun to watch.
Right. So there's a chance when you do the higher keys that it could turn into a wipe fest. And nobody, is that kind of funny to watch? Sure, but if it happened repeatedly, people would get tired of it, and they would tune out. And yeah, and exactly, you don't want to be that team that's in that situation where you wipe and then you come out of the tournament and people are just making fun of your performance in those keys. So Blizzard has set the level of the keys quite a bit lower in the tournament than what you see on live. And it's an understandable decision. When you have that head-to-head format, and especially when you have time slots, each one of these rounds needs to be completed within whatever it ends up being, an hour and a half, 2 hours. You can't add in that randomness of are these teams suddenly going to start wiping for 40, 50 minutes in a dungeon, and it takes forever. So I get that, but that decision also carried into time trials, and they set these keys, like a 20 Maw is not a difficult key at all, even on live. I mean, anyone who's doing Mythic Plus as a, you know, an actual thing, anyone who's really competing Mythic Plus, a 20 monster. And what I was disappointed about in time trials, and what I think could change going forward, I don't think it would be a hard change, is that because of time trials, it's not a head-to-head format. There is no, if a team wipes a bunch in a dungeon, that's not embarrassing and it doesn't screw up schedule. So because you have a week to do all these time trial dungeons, I would have preferred them to set the time trial dungeons at a much higher key level. I would have preferred, rather than see a 20, a 22, and a 24, I would have rather seen them put up, you know, like maybe a 25, a 26, and a 27. And then you have all week. Are you going to wipe in a 25, a 26, and a 27 a lot? Sure, especially if you're going for big pulls. You're going to wipe a lot in those dungeons. But you have all week to get those done and post the fastest times that you can, and you don't run the risk of like an embarrassing performance on a live stream, or something where a dungeon turns into an hour-and-a-half run and it screws up the schedules. So I like the time trial concept, but I think all the keys needed to be dramatically harder, which would take care of the 4 DPS problem, because if you're doing 25 or 26s, no one's running 4 DPS in that.
That makes a lot of sense, I agree.
Yeah, to touch on it though, the other thing that's happening right in time trials is an incredibly grindy process, right? So even if 4 healers, or sorry, 4 DPS, 4 healers is great. 4 DPS, even if it's something that's a lot of times might fall into space, because of the way the time trials are actually functioning, you can just go for that one true just over and over and over. If you have 5 million keys that took you 40 days, one key took you a minute one is the one that's going to stay. So it becomes this very even if you change the format and raise the difficulty of the key, I feel like it would still be the really grinding process. Do you think that is actually helping the players, or even actually I feel like the conditions are just so different in that.
Certainly, there, like I do a Q&A on Wowhead, and one of the questions this week was about like rating versus Mythic Plus, and one of the things that I pointed out was between both of those PvE formats, like free time is going to reign supreme, and that's what, between both Mythic Plus and rating, the top performers are always going to be those people that have the most free time to invest in raids or in dungeons. And certainly being skilled at the game helps, but you're never going to find someone that's at the top of the rating ladder or the top of the Mythic Plus ladder that puts in 5 or 10 hours a week. It's always going to be the people that are investing, you know, 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week in this stuff. And I think Blizzard has kind of leaned into that, that they want people that play a lot to probably have an edge. And I don't know that it's necessarily a problem. You know, on the time trials, obviously any team that was on there all week had an advantage, simply by volume. The more that you pull it, the more opportunities you have for everything to line up and get a great time. But I don't know if that's the problem. I don't know if people should be punished for spending a lot of time doing that type of stuff.
On prior episodes that we had with prior episode that we had with Negura, we're talking about possible ways for teams to qualify, or like to do the time. What would you think if, for example, instead of having those endless amounts of attempts, you would get 5 attempts or a certain amount of attempts per week to get the best time out of it, and then try to get the best time and beat the other teams with those limited attempts?
It'd be different. I don't know, you know, in a lot of these types of questions, it's never better or worse, it's just different. That would certainly be a different way to do it. It would put a different type of pressure on you to make sure that you're performing. Here's the problem, and it's the problem that's existed in rating for a long time, which is that even if Blizzard attempts to curb the ability to actually just like grind keys over and over in the time trial format, there's other ways to practice. You know, there's other ways that you could, if you knew what keys you were going to be doing, you could go in and attempt to simulate that key on live and say, all right, I know we're going to have to do a 20 Eye of Ashara. Let's go into Eye of Ashara and just practice these big pulls over and over. And it may not be exactly the key that we're doing for like the 5 limited attempts, but it's close enough for us to go in and get an idea of what we need to be doing. And you could use other avenues to practice over and over. And if someone has that free time, they'll figure out a way to put it to use.
It's the same thing. You remember back whenever it was an ICC and people would have alts to get around the limited attempts at the last bosses. I don't think that having limited attempts is good at all, because then if somebody DCs, you just lose your attempt, and it's like, what's really the value in that? I mean, maybe having limited time frames, right? You can only do the dungeons within a certain time frame, but then that could be an issue too, because maybe not everybody has that day off work. Honestly, any sort of problem that you, or any sort of system you have, like what JB said, it's always going to be having its own different like categories of positives and negatives. And I honestly think that the system that we have now, and then increasing the keys for the levels so you don't have the 40 PS strategies, would probably be the best choice, at least in my mind, that I've heard of so far.
Yeah, I kind of want to take this one small step further, because every time
Our
I feel
ancestors
like
be praised.
the devs attempt to limit the amount of time you can put into something, it ends up being a little bit weird, right? I mean, that's what different things like that we've seen this expansion to now. The biggest thing that's happening in BFA obviously is the loot change, right? That's trying to affect split runs. Split runs where they were attempted to be targeted this time. Artifact power in a large way actually was supposed to target that, and all of a sudden you still had Maw of Souls happen. More times than not, when you try to let the players play, they just find something that allows them to grind even more.
I don't know. I really feel like Blizzard has done a very bad job being able to influence and expect and preempt player behavior. It seems like whenever they try to do something, it ends up being the exact opposite, right? It's like you have people like with the limited attempts in ICC, they're trying to get rid of split runs. People are just going to play the same of the same alt, you know, like multiple like paladins or something like that. It seems like no matter what they do to try to stop people from doing things, it ends up making it worse.
Yeah, I actually agree, and I always feel like that. Anytime you try to target the top end players and affect how they're actually going to play the game, they're just going to. That's why they're top end players, because they are going to find a workaround. So I honestly think that what you said, JB, about just trying to make a higher level key, I think it's good too, because it essentially creates a gatekeeper that tests an additional thing too. How high of a key can you actually use it to? Because the first thing you said that even got us here was, look, you're not doing the highest level of key in the actual tournament. The big reason for that is because it's a race, right? For it to be a race, it probably needs, you have to find that sweet spot. So I think testing an additional thing on tournament realms could be something that's really good.
And I would agree, and I think that's been one of the complaints about the MDI is it obviously makes sense that Blizzard doesn't want to put the high keys in the live setting because of the possibility of it going wrong, but it also creates a disconnect between what you're doing on live and what you're doing in the MDI. And especially for like my team, we have spent a lot of time doing these dungeons on live with the goal being to push the key as high as possible. And that is a different meta than exists on the MDI. And there are different classes that are strong for that than that are strong for racing. Yes. And it puts a premium on survival on classes that can live through big damage, that can self-heal, that have immunities, things like that. And much less of an emphasis on which classes can do the most burst damage, which classes can, you know, survive, 30 mobs in a trash bowl and blow everything up, and great mobility and things like that. So we spend all this time practicing on live, and then when it comes time for the MDI, which should be the highest level of, you know, like that should be the World Series of Mythic Plus, that should be the Super Bowl of Mythic Plus. And analogy I've given is that the MDI feels more like, to me, a home run derby than it does the World Series. And it feels like it tests a specific skill set of Mythic Plus, but is not like wholly representative of it. And is hitting home runs really fun to watch? Sure. Is watching people pull, Maw in a total of 5 pulls, is that fun to watch? Sure, it's exciting, but I don't feel like it's representative of what Mythic Plus is on live.
That's actually a good comparison.
Yeah, we had so many talks about how there's so many factors in Mythic Plus, right? And I don't necessarily, I still don't think it's completely solid right for the MBI, but you could have tournaments where people hold like a +10, right? And that would be a completely different skill set, like you said. And it's trying to figure out a way to highlight all of them, and the format needs to do that. The format changes coming this time. I feel like one of the biggest things is these fixed keys. Do you think that kind of, like the fixed affixes going towards particular dungeons, do you feel like that actually was a step in the right direction? Stepping aside from Hive Trials and actually looking at the tournament itself, did you think basically knowing, okay, when we go to this dungeon in this round, it's going to have these two affixes. If it's picked second, the team that picks it can select a third affix?
Well, I do think that format plays into the free time discussion, which is if you're a team that has a lot of time on the tournament realm to practice these keys, you can get very comfortable with preset affixes, and you can plan out every step of the dungeon. And if you know that every one of these, like this key is always going to have Sanguine Grievous on it. I can plan every pull around Sanguine Grievous. Then the teams that get the opportunity to practice the most will probably be the most successful, because a lot of that is just, you do these pulls enough that it just becomes a little dance that you do from start to finish, and it's never like it's all orchestrated ahead of time. You know exactly what you're going to do from the moment you step in there. Whereas if you have these keys if you had keys that were just unannounced, I don't even know that I'd mind that. It'd be certainly a lot more stressful to prepare for it as a competitor, but I think it would test your skill set more to say, like, you have no idea what you're going to do when you come into this tournament. You need to know every dungeon, like front to back, and you need to know all the affixes. But you're not going to be able to plan around what you do in all those situations. You're just going to have to wing it on the fly. You're going to have to know your limitations ahead of time. A lot of times these tournament realm pulls, you have no idea what you're capable of. You just go in and you pull everything. And you go, okay, well, we wiped spectacularly to that. Is there anything that anyone could use to clean that up? And you start brainstorming, and okay, well, I've got some stuns. Okay, well, I've got Ursul's Vortex. Okay, and you do it a few more times, and you see like, okay, this is maybe looking manageable. I think we could pull this off with enough attempts. Or maybe it goes so wrong that you know instantly there's no way we're going to be able to do that. And so by doing those iterative pulls, you can work out these huge pulls that no one would ever do on live. But if you just gave someone a key that they had no idea what the affixes were going to be, and they hadn't had an opportunity to practice it on like a 24 versus a 22 versus a 20, you don't know how hard that stuff's going to hit. And I think you get more organic, natural pulls. You pull some stuff, you say, oh, we might be able to do 2 packs here. I think we could get away with 2 packs instead of looking at the entire room and going, I think we could pull everything from here to the next boss. And are those pulls more fun? Yeah, but they also feel kind of fake. You never see anyone doing that in a real setting. And again, I would say it's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just, as someone who pushes on live, a lot of these tournament realm pulls that you see are just feel
they're gimmicky.
Yeah, they just don't feel like something you really ever see in the real world.
Yeah,
yeah,
I think
that's
like
definitely
really
true to an extent.
About.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and Asmongold, I want to hear your opinion on it too, because the real thing is here is it's not saying that either is right or wrong, good or bad. It's just different, right? Is the goal of the Mythic Dungeon Invitational what we're seeing? Should we be trying to see something that's as close to live as possible and really see why these teams are the best teams, getting to play the compositions that they're most comfortable with? Or should we see something that is very focused on the MDI itself and somewhat different, something more rehearsed, something that these teams are practicing for, and like JB said, basically a home run derby?
Well, it's one of those things where obviously if you have higher keys and more organic keys that spawn immediately, then it is going to test the way that people are able to deal with problems on the fly rather than being able to plan out ahead of time, and that's completely true. However, also I think that for the MDI, it's probably more visually appealing for a lot of viewers to see the giant Maw of Souls pulse, and I think that's obviously a factor in why Blizzard is doing the MDI and the way that they set it up and everything else that is involved with it, is because they want to do things that are going to attract as many people as possible. And so it's kind of like, is doing smaller pulls and making it potentially less visibly entertaining or visibly appealing for viewers good in the way that it would still make it more engaging in terms of how much skill it takes? Is that worth the potential loss in terms of like how entertaining or how cool it would look on the screen and how many big numbers there are? Because that's really what people remember, that's what people like to see. So it depends on how you really want to go about it in that way.
I mean, I'm not a super PvE competitor, as I told you, Zach and Asmongold. Zach and Rich. I barely rated. I tried to focus more on the PvP side, which I regret. But in my opinion, I think it would be a lot cooler to see teams face something that they're not used to practicing a million times. Like fighting really high keys or fighting some affixes that are really complicated, and even though like they're not the huge pools where you see a million numbers, they can handle it in a strategic way.
I would want to see, this would be really, real quick, how funny would this be if like for one of the rounds, they just randomly scaled up an old dungeon and they gave it a bunch of Mythic Plus affixes and they just had people go through them and see what happens. Like just in terms of organic gameplay, like, Mythic Shadowfang Keep, plus 25, surprise. I think that'd be funny.
And like that definitely is a place to live. But the main thing that I'm going to say, first of all, let's just go down. What was the most interesting thing to people in this past, the first week of Mythic Dungeon Invitation? It was the Mage Pool, right? That was doubt the most. That was the thing people were talking about. That was the thing, which is cool, right? We can keep that in our mind. That's the type of stuff that people find interesting. No huge surprise there. But I want to actually do kind of what Haddon was saying, which is the idea of, okay, we want to put these guys in untested situations. So one of the big things that's going to happen with viewers, and I'm just putting this out there, and you've seen this in other games before, all of a sudden, the viewer will genuinely not understand what level the team is competing at if it's not that fixed level of competition, right? So if you're changing things all the time, it's impossible, even as a commentator, as a viewer, to really tell how good the team is. If you're trying to build a long-lasting esports with storylines and things like that, look at other, like shooters, right? Viewers all the time are going to be like, why is this guy kill to death ratio so low? Because I have a higher public match. Well, you're playing against hubs, right? So you're playing against a bunch of really bad people, so your KD is going to be high. These guys are playing against other pros. If you don't have certain factors that are going to be the same throughout everything, the chance of it lasting in the sport is greatly diminished.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true. I mean, obviously, in a lot of ways, that with like the Mythic Plus keys and the numbers and everything, it's harder for people to really understand, and I think that's also a problem with Mythic Plus in general, and it's not really a problem, it's just a problem in terms of making it a competitive thing, because people are, there are people that watch the MDI, and they see a group wipe, and they tell themselves, oh, these guys suck, I did this on Heroic yesterday, and I didn't wipe at all. I mean, of course you're going to have people that are like that, but at a certain point also, it's what you need to remember about any of these competitions, and this is at least a perspective that I have, is that they are entertainment, and I think that should always be the main focus, is that what is going to be the most entertaining, what is going to be the most compelling, and what's going to tell the best story, and then you work back from that and you figure out how to make a great competition that can do those three things.
Yeah, also some people in chat brought up, they're like, only people who aren't super into Mythic Plus didn't know about the Mage Pool.
Don't be shy.
A lot of the people who are going to be watching the MDI probably do +2s. Like, that is just...
99% of the population doesn't watch the tournaments.
Really?
So that's it. Well, I mean, if you have 1 million people, let's say 1 million people, and then 1% is like, what is that, like 10,000 or something like that. Yeah, I mean, of course, and like WoW probably has 5 million people, so it has 50,000 viewers, and that would be 1%. Yeah, that's...
The thing is a large... obviously, a large portion of players aren't going to be watching, right? It's always going to be more limited. But you can assume that it's somewhat of a sample size, right? It's not only going to be people who... So you kind of... The same way that Mythic Plus has to be something that's catered to the large audience as well, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
MDI is attempting to do the same thing. So you kind of have to find a format that can encompass all of that, while highlighting players and actually showing their skill set. Like, that is one of the biggest things, right? You actually want to show why these teams are the best in the world. And it's not easy. Like, these conversations are actually super important to try to figure out what the future of the MBI is. And also, I think Skyline D, like, it's pretty clear that they're a powerhouse, right? That's kind of backed up by the fact that they didn't actually lose any of their maps. When we get to other regions where it's a little bit closer, what are we going to see? And also, I kind of want to transition now. JB, do you expect when we move into some of these other regions that we're going to see more fixed compositions? Do you think we're going to see compositions that are a little bit closer together as we move into the future weeks?
I think that, and I don't want to put my own personal stamp on this opinion. It's just what I hear from the community. But I think the opinion is that the APAC region is going to be a little bit weaker than you would expect out of, like, especially EU and North America. I think and that was one of the things, you know, I was discussing with some of the guys I play with for the China regionals, like with the 4 DPS team, no healer. You saw them run 4 DPS, which had been something people had discussed. You know, obviously we saw a lot of that in time trials, but a lot of people sort of hand waved and said, well, don't worry about it. You won't see that in the actual regional rounds because that's way too risky to run 4 DPS. No one would ever try that, in, you know, when everything, you know, when wipes actually mattered and you don't get to reset a key. And then no healer came out and did it. And on the one hand, I think they probably practiced a lot and got comfortable with some of those keys and knew that they could put competitive times up and not worry about wiping. But based on some of the choices that no healer made about like what classes they were bringing, what maps they were picking, didn't feel necessarily like they were playing as a team that thought 4 DPS was its best shot and moving forward with that. It kind of felt like a team that was running 4 DPS as a gimmick going into, like, they qualified for time trials, like they got into the tournament realm, started doing time trials, they did it with 4 DPS, and it just so happened the top 8 teams. And I don't know that team, based on what I saw from the picks from them, I don't know that team expected to make regionals. And when they did, I think they might have gone, oh crap, we're one of the top 8 teams in China, like now we got to go to regionals. And I think they just decided when they got in there that, like, hey, we're just going to run 4 DPS, it'll be funny. And they went into regionals and they ran 4 DPS, and they would just see how far they could get with it, because it didn't feel like that was optimized. That's
cool.
And yeah, it's like a team that's just,
it was
like,
fun to watch.
Yeah, it was. It was entertaining. I hate 4 DPS. It is anathema to the way I play WoW as a healer. I can't stand it. But hats off to that team for going into that situation and saying, you know what, we're doing 4 DPS, we don't care.
Let's just wing it.
Look at how they did Morose. I mean, like, the things that were really fun to watch. But that's the thing, though, Hadi. They didn't just wing it. I mean, look at how they did Morose. Like, when they actually, I will bring up the fact that when they actually did try to run a healer, that was when it went, like, absolutely wrong. But when they did, like, a boss like Morose, for example, a boss that is a very heal-intensive fight, a very difficult fight, they had a rogue that's just pre-banishing all of the bleed effects, just like trying to pre-banish them to make sure that they go out onto other people. The second that they run out of everything, they just start stacking darkness. The amount that they needed to have with that 4 DPS comp was pretty high. They went decently far. I'm trying to remember which round they actually went to, but they didn't just get walked all over. It worked relatively well in the early season. Of course, it starts out in the 22s, then it goes to 23s, and then the final round goes to 24s. It's going to get more and more difficult to actually pull off that healer strategy. Question for you, though. How does it feel knowing that there's kind of 2 healers that are pretty much, I mean, really one healer that is most preferred, and then Druid becomes very strong in some situations. How do you feel about the top tier of healers being so limited?
Well, I think this is a good opportunity to expand the discussion into the top 3 healers, because you'd be remiss not to include Blood DK in that discussion of top healers.
Consumption is really good. Yeah.
And that's, you know, obviously, I actually think the MDI, the format of the MDI, would allow, if someone was really good at Resto Shaman, or Disc Priest, maybe not so much Disc Priest, that's a little more niche than Shaman, but I think if someone was really good at Resto Shaman, they could probably pull it off in the MDI in 22, 23, and 24 keys. I don't know that those level of keys punish the things, or that you get punished in the ways on a 22 and 23 and a 24 that make Shaman non-viable on live keys. So I know that every team's going to be bringing a Resto Druid or a Holy Pally because that's what everyone plays on live, that pushes keys. So that's what everyone's comfortable with, and there's no reason to experiment with a Resto Shaman now. But I think you could actually run a Resto Shaman in a 22 or 23 key and do it effectively. But yeah, certainly you will probably only see two healing classes for like 90 to 95% of the keys from here on out, Resto Druid and Holy Pally. The reason for that is because not only are they two very high throughput healers in a 5-main situation, but they also have an incredible amount of survivability. Druids have access to Bear Form, which is essentially a defensive cooldown that you can shift into at any time you want. It only takes a global cooldown. On top of having Iron Bark and Bark Skin. Pallies innately have 15% more HP than any other class, and they have access to Plate Armor, which is a ton of physical damage mitigation, and they have Bubble and Bop, and those tools allow Hand Sack and Evil Aura and all that other crazy stuff that Holy Pallies have, and it allows you to survive a bunch of stuff, both individually as the healer and your group. It allows you to keep people in your group alive, and those things are necessary for pushing high keys on live. You have to have those things. You don't need those things necessarily in a 22 or 23 or 24. I think you could see other healers show up, but everyone is practiced enough on Mr. Druid and Holy Power that I think those would be the only ones that you see the high teams using.
What about their damage too? I feel like their damage is probably a factor.
It certainly is. The one thing that, and I've had this conversation before, they say, well, Resto Druid damage is just, no other healer is going to touch that. And that might be true. But at the same time, if you go back to the first MDI, one of the narratives from the first MDI was that Holy Pally damage is untouchable by other druids, or by other healing classes, excuse me. And that their single target damage, they were just capable of so much more burst that it was stupid to bring any other class, because Pallies could heal everything and their damage was just that good that there was no point bringing any other class. And it wasn't until sometime between the first and second MDI that Druids started experimenting with damage in dungeons and showing that they could do big AoE damage and very competitive single target damage. And that narrative shifted between the first and second MDI. And what I don't know is, there may be healing classes out there that are capable of putting out a ton of DPS, but there just hasn't been that like unicorn player that's come along for one of those classes and shown that they're capable of doing it in a 24 or 25 key for the rest of the community to copycat off of. And had there not been druids coming along showing the rest of the druid community that you could do that, I think the narrative would still be in this MDI, wow, look at that Holy Pally single target damage. Because the Holy Pally single target damage is pretty straightforward. You know, you pop wings, you throw Holy Shock and Crusader Strike into the boss over and over and over and over, and you do a ton of damage. The Druid stuff is a little more nuanced. You have to pick Barrel Affinity, you have to have a whole rotation of putting up your bleeds and shifting in and out of cat form, and it takes a lot more work to make the Druid damage, like to make the single target competitive. AoE damage is a lot more straightforward, you just run around and swipe. But I think that a lot of times the meta evolves in a region because there's a really good player that does something on a class and everyone sees that and copies it. And if you never have that really good player come along to show people what a class is capable of, people may just go along thinking that the class can't do those things, and the class can, it's just no one's ever shown that it's possible.
So, like, I think a good example of that is, like, for soloing, everybody thought that blood DKs were the best for soloing, and then Demon Hunters came out, and that my own guy sold a bunch of stuff with the Demon Hunter, and now everybody tries to solo stuff with the Demon Hunter. You know, I don't know how much you follow that kind of stuff, but I think that's a pretty good example of somebody who's very, very intense on, like, playing a certain class, kind of influencing the entire meta.
Yep. And, you know, someone asked the other day, why do we see so many Demon Hunters in China compared to Windwalkers in other regions? And I think that you saw in like in the western region, I think you saw very high level Windwalkers show up on live. I know one of the guys on my team, Darky, has been doing a Windwalker on live for the last, 4 or 5 months. We've been pushing keys with him, and people were able to watch that on stream and see this Windwalker just doing, a million more DPS than any other class in the dungeon, just absolutely crushing people. And I think that shifts, that warps the meta in a region when you have the highest profile people playing a certain class and showing what it's capable of. And it may be, I'm just making this up, but it may be that you just never had a top tier Windwalker show up in China. And maybe all their best players were Demon Hunters, and everyone went, oh my god, look how strong Demon Hunters are when this guy plays Demon Hunter. And if they had one of the top tier guys come along and play Windwalker, maybe everyone in China goes, oh wow, I need to play Windwalker. These damage on these guys is nuts.
It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird that they haven't, like, that China didn't experiment with Windwalkers since they saw a really unusual volume of Windwalkers in the Mythic Plus competitions, right?
It's not that weird though. Right? The meta is going to evolve completely differently, and then let's say it's something you get exposed to, it just becomes a comfort thing. You know, it's like, are you going to try to pick a Windwalker in a day, or you see the other people on CR playing it, and they're also comfortable flying as well. It's like, are you going to try to pick that up, or you're comfortable with, and you even see they were playing Hunters with Sentinel. Like, what? Like, they were playing very weird things. And I think that's one of the things that is interesting about the fact that they are separate. But it is important to keep track of as well, right? Like, even when you're playing Druids for a lot of the time, you actually go ahead and stack those legendaries, right? And get massive fire damage up as well.
Yeah, the Druid damage is certainly influenced a lot by the gear that you wear. There's a few different ways that you can do it, and that's one of the reasons you want to talk about what other healing classes are capable of with damage, which is that there may be some really unique legendary, like DPS legendary combinations that are available to other healers that people just haven't experimented with in dungeons, and maybe there could be some really strong damage coming out of these other healers if there was a little creativity. Now, maybe not. Maybe that's been mined out completely, and there's just they just can't do that, but it's hard to say for me without having played those classes myself that, like, there's no way that you could do damage on those classes comparable to a Druid or a Paladin.
I think meta has always evolved. I think one of the best examples of that is Super Smash Bros. Melee. I don't know if you guys follow that at all, but the game's been out for over 15 years and people are still trying different things. So the more that people play Mythic Plus and the more people that are involved with it, the more the meta will probably change and evolve.
Also, we started talking about chess there. For the game itself, but as far as do you think that a Mythic Plus player should be able to get everything that they need to compete at the highest level of Mythic Plus? Should be able to be fired in Mythic Plus, or do you think that it's good for the game that PvPers, raiders, people who run dungeons, people who run quests all want to do all of the content, all of the same things together?
As you know, if I were to put on my Blizzard hat for a moment, certainly I could see why a developer who spent time creating all these things would want everyone to feel and seem to participate in all those things, even if only superficially, even if it was just, like the weekend event where we have an event where you need to go do 5 arenas for the week, and maybe not fully invested in it, but at least go check out the, we had a team that spent 6 months designing this arena and making sure it was balanced and stuff. We want people to go look at it. I get it. But if you're trying to push something as an esport, with Mythic Plus especially, and like this conversation wouldn't have existed at the beginning of Legion because Mythic Plus wasn't an esport at that point, but with the arrival of the MDI, now you're trying to push it into esport territory, and esports you shouldn't be trying to have conversations like which things should you be forced to do on a week-to-week basis to stay competitive in an esport. Now it's like we need to be figuring out how to level the playing field, not how to get people to sample all aspects of the game.
I agree, but I also think that the requirement, because in order to qualify for the tournament realm this time around, you only needed to do 5 22s, right?
23s.
I think it was 22s, but let's say it was 22s or 23s. Either way, I feel like that would be very much accessible to somebody that never stepped foot into Mythic Raids. If they're just doing a Heroic every week for Titan Forges, they have all the decent, at least baseline trinkets, they can probably do 22s or 23s, at least 5 of them. I mean, obviously people that raid in Mythic are going to have a better chance at it, but if anybody that thinks that they're actually going to compete and do well in the MDI, they're probably going to be able to do those 22s or 23s without Mythic gear. Okay, yeah, people were saying it was 23s. I mean, do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I certainly think that anyone, like, you did not need to have Mythic gear to do the 23s. You know, people ask me, do I need the Mythic raid to do Mythic Plus at a high level? And the answer is really, unless you're trying to do 25s, 26s, 27s up in that range, you could do heroics and just rely on some nice Titan forging to carry you through most of the Mythic Plus spectrum.
Yeah, and that's, I think the main thing is like kind of designing the game, and this is also another concern that I have with, like, you know, the personal stuff that they were doing, is that I don't really want to see them design the game for, you know, a percent of a percent, right? You have the 1% of players that are doing 25s or 23s or whatever, and then you have the 1% of those people that's even trying to compete. And if they're trying to design the game around that and kind of creating kind of sub-games, you know, like your Mythic Plus sub-game, PvP sub-game, rating sub-game, I feel like the game would be better overall if you did have to take those different categories and play, you know, maybe a little bit of PvP, and that would help you in PvE in some sort of way. I think that makes the game feel a little bit more full, even though in some ways it can be really frustrating and it can be a setback in certain circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, if the tournament realm was open year-round, and I could just access the tournament realm whenever I wanted and practice on that for the MDI, then then they could do whatever they wanted on live servers. You know, if they want to make people Mythic raid, if they want to do Mythic Plus on live servers, that's fine. But to the extent that I'm trying to compete in a tournament, like, a lot of the other concerns about the game sort of fall away when you are now talking about the tournament. And because the tournament realm is only open for a few weeks prior to the start of the MDI, and then only open through the duration of the MDI, you know, if I'm trying to, because live is so different from the tournament realm, I want access to the tournament realm if you're going to be trying to make decisions like, well, you should be Mythic grading all the time if you want to.
So you think it would be more, it would be fine if the tournament realm was available more often? Basically. Well,
it's tough. You know, I get why Blizzard doesn't want that, because then you get people, you know, there's a lot of people that wanted access to the tournament realm that had no desire whatsoever to participate in the MDI or to do Mythic Plus at all. They just wanted to go in there and get free loot. They wanted to know what it felt like to have 970 tier 20, 970 tier 21, 970 trinkets, and just screw around with, like, perfect gear. And so having access to the tournament realm all year round, I get why Blizzard doesn't want that, and I'm not sure it'd be helpful for the game. But without having that, I'm not saying, because that's just that, I'm not saying you shouldn't necessarily have that, but without having that, you have to take some of those considerations into account when designing live servers. If you've got this Mythic Plus tournament, and I'm supposed to be using the live realms to sort of hone my skills for that tournament, then I don't want to have to worry about raiding 15 hours a week to get the gear necessary.
You'd only really be honing your skills to the point to getting into the, that would just be the trials, and then after that, you'd be on the tournament realm if you qualified for the 523s, right?
Yeah, but there's its own, you know, and that's, like, it's kind of a different discussion to have about live versus MDI, but there's its own competition that sprung up on live servers.
Oh, absolutely.
And to the extent that I want to compete on live servers, even then, I don't necessarily feel, you know, like, if you go look at some of the teams that were pushing high up in Mythic Plus, you'd look at the gear that was on the characters, and they'd be, you know, they were obviously Mythic Raiders, and they obviously done split runs, and they had, you know, 980 tier, and they had, you know, huge relics, and they had, you know, the Warforged trinkets, and you're kind of going like, how am I ever supposed to compete with this guy in a mythic dungeon? Like, I just can't do the same amount of healing or damage as that. And when you're pushing on live against each other, that feels bad.
I don't know. I feel like that kind of feels good if you're the person that raids all that much more time, right? I mean, I can see, obviously, there's two perspectives on this, and I can see what you're saying entirely. But if somebody's going to spend the extra 15 hours a week doing Mythic raids, it seems like they should get something out of it. But saying that, I also think that they should make Mythic Plus a little bit more lucrative. Because to, like, compare it to Mythic and Taurus and, like, the gear, especially, like, with tier sets and everything, obviously doing Mythic and Taurus is much better use of your time than doing Mythic Plus in almost every circumstance.
It'd be nice. It would be nice. Sorry for interrupting. It would be nice that Mythic Plus would benefit, like give you a certain benefit that's unique to Mythic Plus, and rating would give you also like an edge or like a certain benefit that you would only get with Mythic ratings. Because if you don't get Mythic benefit, like why would you rate it after instead of like just
but here's the other thing too though. Mythic Plus, like those dungeons are gonna come out at the beginning of BFA the same that they did at Legion, and like that. The thing is, there is actually no reason if it's so good there's no reason to go into raid at all, especially now with here. You're gonna completely lose raiders, right? That's the line that I'm walking right now. And I know that there's been that balance in the past. It's obviously changing a little bit, but it somewhat becomes a thing where I don't see a world where truly people who want to raid just raid, and people who want to do Mythic Plus just do Mythic Plus. There's always going to be a piece of loot that you want.
Well, I don't really think that's entirely healthy for the game, right? Like giving everybody their own different like world of the game. I think one of the mistakes Blizzard's made over the past history of the game is that they've allowed people to kind of self-segregate. Okay, I'm a PvPer, I only want to do PvP, and I don't really think that's been healthy for the game entirely.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it when PvP and PvE had their mix. I obviously get it is bad, but I think that Mythic Plus and raiding in particular is one of the most interesting intersections of that we've ever seen, right? Like there's just a lot going on there where all of the sudden the question is, if I want to just do Mythic Plus, something that's being valued in the way that raiding is, should I have to do raiding? I want to go back to what you're saying though with the actual servers themselves, the actual tournament realm. You really, if you put it in a place where the top players are always playing in the tournament realm, the MDI really isn't testing at all on live. So do you think that that's ever the right way? Because that goes back to what you talked about.
Well, I would certainly like the and like the MDI is clearly different than live, and I don't think that it's necessarily that you should change the MDI, because I think the MDI is the MDI now. I don't think that we're going to see a massive overhaul in the way that it works. So I guess then what I would like to see is a change on live. And if the MDI is going to test how big of pulls you can do on relatively lower keys, I would like some system on live that allows me to do that on live. Because like right now on live, you can't really do that, short of like dropping a key every time and practicing on 24. So if the MDI is set in the way that it's going to be as a tournament going forward, then I would like Blizzard to make an attempt to make live look more like the MDI, so that the stuff that I'm doing on live carries over to the MDI. Because in a lot of ways, I feel like the last 6 months of practice that I've put in on pushing keys certainly has been helpful. We've developed some strategies that we can use in the MDI, and we've gotten coordination as a team that's helpful. But I feel like a lot of the lessons we've learned and a lot of the tricks that we've developed on live are just useless or irrelevant on the MDI. And it would be nice to feel like all the time that we have put in on live could be useful in the MDI.
How would you like to see that happen?
Well, that's just it. I don't necessarily. I'm being kind of a jerk because I'm suggesting that live look more like the MDI, and I'm not offering any helpful ways to make that happen. I don't know exactly how you would do that.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's just that to me is the problem, is that the MDI and live are clearly separate things. They're
separate goals.
Right.
They're separate win conditions.
And so it's just awkward as someone who puts in a lot of time on live to then try to shift gears. And especially, there's other considerations outside of just performance on the MDI, like we've got a team on live who have practiced on like a Warlock, a Balanced Druid, and a Windwalker, and two of those classes are essentially useless in a lot of keys on the MDI. Like nobody's bringing Warlocks and Boomkins to 22 keys. That's not happening. So those guys have had to relearn different classes for the MDI, and certainly is there some value in having different classes. You say like, well, people should be able to play a lot of different classes. True, but I feel like you shouldn't be playing one class on live and then feel forced to play a completely different class for the MDI because of the key difference. And it'd be nice if you could practice the things that you would want to play on the MDI on live.
I can see what you're saying. Go ahead.
Well, if you basically change, and this is where it goes back and forth, and this is why the format for this is so interesting compared to other things. You change the key in a certain round, and all of a sudden a different class becomes way more valuable. I mean, look at Moonkins, right? When are Moonkins really strong? Not in really any of the keys that we're going to see in the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. Are there keys where they could be good? Yeah, of course. Think about for format, but I want to start to move a little bit away from format and look forward right now to BFA. And guys, start thinking of questions because we're starting to get to that time as well. But JB, while we have you on the show, Mythic Plus came out in this expansion. What would you like to see in BFA in dungeons as features? Like, what would you want to see change? What would you want to see future Mythic dungeons actually look like with the esport in mind?
Well, one of the things that I think will be helpful for Mythic Plus going forward is for one of the issues you run into in the higher levels is one-shot abilities. And certainly, with infinite scaling, you will eventually run into an ability that kills you instantly if you push a key high enough. But you've got some of these bosses, especially, where they use abilities that there's no way to avoid them. There's very few ways to mitigate the damage, and it just kills you. And it puts a sort of soft cap on the level of keys that you can do. And it would be nice for there to be less one-shot abilities in the game that are unavoidable. If it's going to be like one-shot damage, it would be nice to have some way to avoid it. And if it's going to do a lot of damage to you, it would be nice for it to either be over a window rather than all at once. So if you want to do a lot of damage but over the course of like 3 or 5 seconds rather than all at once, that would be nice. Or if it's an ability that is sort of telegraphed before it's coming out so that as a team you have the ability to coordinate cooldowns or things like that. I think that would improve a lot of the scaling issues in the higher level dungeons. And a lot of things I'd like to see for Mythic Plus and BFA aren't even necessarily related to the dungeons themselves. One thing that's been commonly discussed in the community is that it would be nice to have Mythic Plus take on a more sort of institutionalized role and be given the same sort of treatment that PvP and raiding have in the sense of, with like rewards, with official leaderboards, titles, mounts.
Well, they have the official leaderboards now. You know, they have that. It's just like it's not really very easy to see, and people don't really pay a lot of attention to it. That is the big question. I want to see what do you want to see in terms of incentivization going forward? Do you think Mythic Plus is incentivized enough, or what? Well,
it depends a lot on how like the Azerite system works, because with like the beginning of Legion, people were in Mythic Plus all day because it was the best source of AP in the game. It didn't really matter whether you liked Mythic Plus or not. It was just the best way to farm AP. And if Azerite is a similar system, where you can go into Mythic Plus dungeons and just farm crazy amount of Azerite in Mythic Plus, it probably doesn't need anything else to get you into dungeons. That's probably all that would be required. And then as the expansion went along, Legion went along, there was less and less reason to do Mythic Plus from an AP perspective, because either you capped out your weapon, like at the end of Trial of Valor, they put the hard caps on the weapons until Nighthold came out, and now they've instituted Accordance procs, where scaling on it is just, it takes so much AP that it's not worth grinding for it. So Mythic Plus now you have less and less reason as the expansion went along. So a lot of that's just kind of, turning the knob for various systems, which things are going to get people in the dungeon or not. It would be nice, I think, to have things that existed in Mythic Plus that helped you specifically for Mythic Plus. If it was like little, like if Mythic Plus featured more AoE trinkets. Like, it's been one of the things about Legion that's been kind of annoying is that all of the best AoE trinkets in the game have come from raids, where you are least likely to use an AoE trinket. Okay. And so you've got the people that want to do Mythic Plus feeling like they have to go raid for the AoE trinkets. And then a lot of the best single target trinkets in the game come from Mythic Plus, and while you use those in Mythic Plus, they have a lot of value in raids, so I know people complain a like, oh my god, Eye Command is so strong for single target damage. I have to run Upper Karazhan all day, every day until I get Eye Command. So it'd be nice if there was some thought given to where those trinkets were situationally strongest, and then portioned out appropriately.
That makes sense.
Or at least a balance between the two, so that there's an analog. You know, if there's a strong AoE trinket in the raid, there's a similarly strong AoE trinket in Mythic Plus that you can get. So yeah, I think the reward system probably.
What about cosmetics?
Cosmetics, yeah, that'd be another thing. The Legion dungeon stuff was so boring. It was all the same model. It was like every piece you got looks the same. You can instantly tell by looking at someone whether they're wearing the dungeon equipment, and it like the fact that there was I think Cathedral and Seat both had unique armor because they were put in later in the game. But all the day one dungeons, everything looked the same, and it was not a particularly cool looking armor set. And it'd be nice if Mythic Plus had specific cosmetic stuff. Even if it's just the dungeon pieces themselves, if each dungeon had its own armor set, which might be asking a little too much, but given the fact that you're seeing it.
That may happen, right?
Really could.
There's been a big things with getting rid of tier. They were kind of saying, okay, well everything's going to be somewhat clean. I know we haven't seen that coming out yet, but I forget what the pirate dungeon is actually called. The pirate dungeon were to be tested. I don't remember either of their names, but
Freehold and Control Before.
The pirate one, you got a pirate junk, in the troll one, you got cool troll gear. So I think that maybe they're moving in this direction, which I think is a good thing. But I want to actually ask before I forget. There was a really interesting thing that happened in the first MBI, and that was a warlock going around and actually trolling a pet that was giving the dome. I forget what the buff that was called. Put the green kind of dome on the ground, and it did a little bit of damage, essentially doing the haste buff. That got nerfed right after the MBI, and we saw they got nerfed. Now this main got nerfed. We see now that warriors are stolen like the same way they used to be able to, and things like that. Where do you think the line should be in the future of BFA with certain classes in dungeons having classes makes them a huge bonus to have inside the dungeon compared to perfect balance across the board for all classes?
That, you know, obviously that's tough. I know that in the past that's always been an issue with DKs with I forget what the ability is called, but the one that lets you steal
Dark Stalwart.
Yeah, that one. And I think DKs are getting a form of that back in BFA, where they can steal something and then like give the buff to a party member or something like that. And those types of abilities are always really scary because typically it's binary. Either it's worthless or it's overpowered. And when you get something like the Mage Spellsteal buff, it makes that class feel like you have to bring it in order to be competitive. And that's not the case on live necessarily, but in the MDI, I'm sure there's a lot of teams that feel like the mage buff is so strong that you have to bring the mage, which seems to work against the idea of Blizzard, you know, bring the player, not the class. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's about balancing, and if Blizzard thinks that things like that are cool, like for instance, they didn't nerf the mage thing in BRH. Like they nerfed the warlock thing, and they nerfed the spell reflect thing with warriors. But they did not. Like, they came out in the Ninja Discord and said that the mage thing is staying the same. They don't want to get rid of it. And that it's kind of confusing, you know, when you've seen other similarly strong abilities get axed immediately once the full power of those gimmicks was demonstrated in the MDI, and then...
I think that's pretty different though, right? I mean, because the mage thing, that's a buff that you get for like 2 packs, and the Cathedral of Eternal Night, the green circle, you could use that for the whole raid, for the whole dungeon. That's pretty different.
I think the mage thing is
yeah.
really strong.
Well,
to be honest,
if it's just a couple of pulls, I mean, that's very different. I mean, like you can use like the the Shroud, or the Shroud of Unseen. You know, that's powerful in its own way. But you're right that there's definitely like a fine line between giving classes a way to kind of stand out, and at the same time not making that class required to burn.
I really think like this mage pool. I like it. I'm not saying I want to see it. I don't think it's got nerfed either. It's insane. You actually do like 60 million single target damage on a boss that takes out so much weight potential, cuts down the amount of time, and it's not that difficult. Warlock thing was difficult to pull off. The warrior thing was a niche little thing that made them good in one dungeon. I don't know. I feel like if the mage thing is cool, all the other stuff should be cool. But honestly, I do think balance is something that's important. I see the argument that's important. Class I can't completely ramp it, but moving into future BFA, I feel like there is a space where all classes kind of like something to shine on a little bit. It doesn't need to be quite as dramatic as 60 minutes of party damage.
I didn't see 60 million single target. When did that happen?
Yeah, you didn't see that?
No, that was an AoE pull, I thought.
Oh, no. So basically what happens is Mage continually gets the buff over and over again with Black Rook Hold, and they spend a little bit, they invest a solid amount of time, grabs it, and then they keep that buff going, and then you go into the boss, and you just get to destroy things.
I didn't see that part. I just saw the clip where they did the AoE. I'll have to watch the whole dungeon. Maybe I'm wrong.
You can do it.
Holy shit.
Yeah. You usually just do it past the second boss.
You can keep, if you're good about it, you can keep that mob up the whole dungeon.
Yeah, I think that we saw them make it onto. Did they make it all the way to the last boss with it? I actually wasn't testing that, so I only get to watch them. I know we saw one of them actually get to use the mage buff on Smash Fight as well. But did they actually get to make it all the way to the final boss?
I will admit I didn't watch the whole series. I think someone was saying that they took it into the final boss and were refreshing stacks on the final boss by like dropping it during the intermission phase.
Yeah.
And
do that.
So yeah, if you can keep that mob healed up, make sure it doesn't die, then you can have that buff throughout the dungeon.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at a clip now. That does seem ridiculous. I thought it was just for a couple of pulls. If it's for the multiple pulls and the boss, yeah, that's too much.
So it's literally the same as the Warlock buff works, as far as like the micro that actually goes into it, but the difference between the Warlock buff is the Warlock buff, you can have it and it will go throughout the entire dungeon, but it wasn't like the craziest buff ever. The mage buff, you can actually sit there for an extended period of time and ramp this up. The thing is that 2 minutes, let's say, that you have to invest to stack up the buff, guarantees you just the cleanest pull ever. And it's really strong. The thing is it's not that strong in every single dungeon, right?
They could just make it only stack up to a certain part, or a certain percentage, or a certain cap, like only like 5 stacks or 3 stacks or something like that. It seems like that would be a pretty simple solution.
Yeah, I think that there are that AC chat going right now. It's not cheating, it's clever use of game mechanics. Clever use of game mechanics. It's just, should it be allowed? I actually thought the Warlock was the problem. I was surprised that happened. This didn't, to be completely honest. But it's just something to think about in the future of dungeons. I actually like the fact that certain classes can interact with certain mobs in a very different way. That actually opens up the possibility of them being viable. Obviously, things like these have traditionally been things like Reflect, ALLCRAFT, Simulacra. The thing is those are traditionally the ones that go further, right? Because they're straight up negating an ability, stealing an ability, things like that. Anything within slaves and things like that also come in big. Definitely something to think about as we move into BFA. But something that Hotted, I know we want to talk about right now. We got to talk about this when we're talking about how BFA is actually going to look as well, and that's going to be these GCD changes that we've talked about quite a lot. Funnily enough, I kept saying that the one group of players who cares about the Steelers out in the field. So
Yep.
GCD that we may see happen to BFA.
I think the only ability of mine that got put on a GCD that was not previously was Innervate. And I think otherwise, none of the defensive GCDs got touched. So, as far as I'm concerned, they can do whatever they want. If it's only with the offensive GCDs, they can put it on, 10 seconds. So then I don't care. And I can understand why the offensive players are up in arms about it. And it does seem like that seems like the kind of change you would make specifically for PvP. I can understand why you would want that for PvP, the ability to instantly tap into offensive power whenever you want, as far as the GCD is concerned. It's hard for someone to react to that type of burst damage. So I can kind of understand from a PvP perspective. I don't really understand in PvE what the concern is about being able to pop offensive cooldowns on command. Like doesn't seem like an issue. So
I hate it. I think it's terrible, honestly. I mean, I'm a Fury Warrior, right? So I've got to spend like 6 seconds using all my cooldowns whenever this actually goes live, if it does. I think the problem is the cooldowns are too strong. Like, I mean, you have cooldowns that just make you like every attack crit, and you do more damage. It's way too much.
Yeah, and a lot of sentiment in chat right now trying to read what you guys are saying. And I want to remind you guys, you can start shooting us out questions right now. We're kind of at that point in the show, so if you want to go to @ALLCRAFT or any of our personal Twitters, go ahead and tweet that out or use the hashtag ALLCRAFT. We'll also say that in the chat, but try to tweet it. So there's a lot of people for us and wants to answer your question. But a lot of people saying, hey, look, it obviously appears and some people are saying that it appears like it, some say that they don't. I think that that's the area that it does need to be tested the most, but it makes things scripted in a certain way. I don't know. I'm just not sure if that's really the reason that it's happening. If it's for PvP alone.
I mean, it would make sense. Like it's the part of the game that's going to be affected the most, where we need to have pretty quick reaction times based on whatever your opponent does, right? You can kind of plan it with PvE. Obviously, some shit might go down. It might be really weird in PvE, but I don't know, the fact that every like push or burst or a kill attempt might be telegraphed is pretty concerning. It kills the thrill of the game.
I mean, there are definitely I have concerns with it, but the thing is, if it doesn't go too crazy, it could end up not being that big of a deal, right? If a few abilities got added to the GCD as a tuning mechanism, I could almost live with it. It's just seeing everything go that way just does not make sense at all. Like seeing certain movement abilities and things like that going there doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
I
don't.
That's something that happens.
Okay, go ahead. Your mic cut out. I don't really think it's. Oh, okay. Yeah, I really don't think it's good for playability. I think that's really the main concern, right? I mean, people are playing their class, and putting everything on the GCD like that does not necessarily make playing your class feel better. I think it makes it feel worse, and because of that, I think they should address, like what we were talking before, they should address the actual problem, not just symptoms of the problem. I think the problems with the cooldowns are too strong, and because of that, it makes classes outside of cooldowns very weak and unfun to play, and then like the 5 or 6 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever you have your cooldowns up, then you're a god. And I don't really like that whole, the hot and cold mechanism.
Yeah. Right now, I kind of want to start to transition into the question section of the show. Chuck, please stop calling me. Also, I want to give a major congratulations. I'm not sure if chat's trolling or if they are serious. I know that was supposed to be around now, but major congratulations to Quinn. I think Quinn had his baby.
Yeah, I wanted to say that too.
What?
Quinn just posted on Twitter that his daughter is all well, posted a picture of the kid, and